I'm Emily Mashak, and you're listening to Tuned Into NoCo, Town Square Media's show that lets you know what matters in NoCo. I'm talking today with Deb DeLuca-Forzley from the Larimer County Child Protection Services about the issue of child abuse in our community and what we can do to prevent it, especially with the upcoming Realities Rooftop Raise with Realities for Children. So thank you so much for joining me today, Deb.
You bet. Glad to be here.
Now, before we get into the topic at hand, I want to talk a little bit about you. How did you find your way to the Larimer County Child Protection Services?
So I've worked for the Larimer County Department of Human Services for 33 years. I actually have my degree in social work and had intended to spend some time in the field of child welfare, and then probably thought, I'll move to something else as time goes on. And here I am still here. So I have found lots of reasons to stay in this field, including the continued belief in families in our community, as well as having lots of different opportunities within the field of child welfare and Larimer County Department of Human Services to try to have an impact.
People don't often think of Larimer County as a place where child abuse would happen. How big of an issue is child abuse really here in Larimer County?
I think it's really important to mention that it's child abuse and neglect, because what folks often see more so than the abuse may be neglect. So child abuse and neglect has been around for years and years. It's probably changed over time. It looks different. We have families are constructed differently in terms of parents both working, maybe different parents staying home. We have blended families. We have all kinds of different circumstances for families. So it looks maybe different over time in terms of what we see in our community, but it has been around forever. And what also you have often seen is potentially the impact of substance use disorders or mental health, behavioral health disorders having different impacts on our families and our community. So it may look different, but it has existed for a long time.
How have you personally seen this issue of child abuse and neglect impact Larimer County throughout your job?
The impact that I have seen over the years working in this field is pretty extensive. So if I think about impact on kids' attendance at school, their ability to be present at school, their ability to focus, the trauma that children face as a result of child abuse and neglect, the trauma that parents and caregivers have faced in their own lives. And then as they become parents, they're trying to navigate a world that maybe they don't have a lot of support from their own family of origin to be able to support them in being parents, as well as those that are working really, really hard just to make ends meet, and how challenging that can be for them as well, and finding supportive and quality childcare that they can actually afford, or finding employment that actually is able to put a roof and food on the table for their family. Finding reasonable and affordable housing has been challenges. So I think it spreads the spectrum, and it may look really extreme to those stories that you hear in the news often are the worst of the worst. And those aren't the ones that I think of the most, because those actually don't happen that often. What we see are those more around the area of neglect and where families are trying their best and things happen. And honestly, there are a lot of strengths within families, and often what we see is what didn't go well at some point in time. And we're really moving in a direction to say what has gone well with these families so we can support them in continuing to raise their children.
Well, thank you for sharing your experience with that, Deb. And one of the reasons we're here to talk today is because April is National Child Abuse Prevention Month. How big of a role does prevention and awareness play in stopping child abuse and neglect?
Our community is moving strongly in the direction of preventative work in child welfare and really helping families not have to be involved in the formal child welfare system at all. And so the phrase from Benjamin Franklin that says an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of intervention is what really strikes us, and what we've sort of landed on in thinking about how is it that we can move away from being a reactionary system to more of a preventative system. We know that if we could step in and help support families earlier on before things hit that day that just is a really bad day and things don't go well, if we can step in ahead of time and direct them to the right resources to help create support networks for them, to help them find other families that are going through the same circumstances as they are. Anything we can do to help prevent those circumstances from happening in the first place only supports and enhances our community as a whole. And it's going to take our whole community to be able to do that, knowing that there may be gaps in services. As I mentioned previously, affordable housing is a struggle for a lot of families. There may be those gaps that we're going to have to fill as a community and recognize it'll have to be addressed as we move toward a preventative system. And again, there's a lot of efforts across our community that are moving in that direction. And the only way we'll step in and make a difference in child abuse and neglect in our community is by moving upstream and offering preventative services.
Would you be able to expand on that a bit more, exactly what prevention entails? How can our listeners and the community actively work to prevent child abuse and neglect?
Maybe first of all, it's just being aware that it exists and not being afraid to step in and ask how they can help. What we as professionals and or those in this field may think is helpful or supportive for a family may not really be helpful. So one of the first things that we recognize we need to do is ask those that are impacted by it the most, what is it that they need? So don't hesitate to ask. Talk to parents, talk to neighborhoods, talk to those that work in the mental health profession. Ask those folks that are involved and those families and kids, what do they need to be able to maybe avoid being involved in the more formal child welfare system? Also is look and see what it is that we can do as a community together. So do we have enough support for parents in accessing affordable childcare? Do we have efforts, and are there places that they can be participants on those committees or coalitions that are looking at affordable housing? Can they help offer support to other agencies that are serving families? So whether it's a behavioral health system, whether it's looking at substance abuse disorder, whether it's parenting support, anything, or even all of our partner agencies that are offering services to family, when they're doing their fundraising efforts, are there efforts that they can put forth to those agencies to help them be able to continue to provide the services to families? And especially as those services are moving more to preventative, sometimes those services aren't funded as much as those that are reactionary. And so it may be financial, it may be attending some sort of a board or coalition, it may be just being out there and asking families what it is that they need to continue to be supportive in their neighborhoods and with their families.
So it's really just kind of opening the door and starting that conversation.
Yes, I think that's extremely important. And again, I'll say, I believe in all my heart that all of us who work in this field have always wanted to do the best we can to support families and make sure that children stay in their families, that they stay healthy and well in their families. And we've started to look not only at safety and permanency, but well-being for our kids and families. And again, the folks that are impacted the most by our services are the ones we need to hear from. And that doesn't always happen. We don't always get a lot of good feedback. We don't always ask the questions. Those that have lived experience should be at the table with us, helping us make those decisions. So open the door, ask questions. Don't be afraid to talk about it.
I think that is great advice. And now, what do you think listeners need to be more aware of when it comes to the issue of child abuse and neglect? What do people not really think about that they should be?
Maybe that, and again, that's probably something I'd love to hear what others say. What is their hesitation? What is it that they're maybe it's lack of information. Maybe it's hesitancy to get involved. Maybe it's, I don't think it really exists. I don't want to know. I hear folks tell me, friends, family members, that I may have said over the years what I do for my job. And I'll say I work in child welfare. And what I often hear is, oh my gosh, I don't know how you do that. How can you do that? Well, we all have to be a part of that process. And so maybe it's just, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to talk about it. Don't be afraid to know that child abuse and neglect exists in our community. And there's things that we can all do to be a part of that preventative solutions to those. So I think more than anything, it's open your doors, open your eyes, be mindful about how families are impacted, and be willing to support them, and know that most families, in my experience in 33 years, want to be healthy, well families, and parents want to do a good job. I believe that with my heart. And so what can we do to assure that we're supportive of them and ask them what they need?
And you touched on this earlier when we were talking about prevention, and you mentioned that it's a big community effort. But if you could just expand a little bit more, how do you see us as a community in Larimer County making lasting change when it comes to the issue of child abuse and neglect?
Again, I think as we are moving slowly in the world of preventative efforts and not just reactionary efforts, I see a lot of our partner agencies making the same, offering services to move upstream to support families. That this community in Larimer County is already moving in that direction, and we just need to continue again offering supportive services to those agencies that are already serving families, paying attention to what's intervention and what's prevention, and really trying to put our efforts in thinking about, if we're going to prevent things from happening, what is it that we need to put in place? And I think the second part to this for me is, let's focus on what's going well. Our system has had, and not because of anyone's lack of best intentions, but our system typically looks at what's not going well for a family. What's the bad thing that have happened? And none of us feel very good about talking about when we haven't had things go well in our family. But if we start talking to the families about, and then this can be in any setting, this can be an informal conversation, this can be in a formal conversation, it can be in, if they're participating in more formal intervention services, but talking to families about what is it that goes well for you? When things have gone well, what was in place for you? And then how do we do more of that? So instead of looking at what's missing, let's talk about what was there and what was in place when things were going well, and then put our efforts into continuing to support those things. So for example, I had a full-time job, I had insurance, and I had a steady income so I could pay my rent. When I lost my job, I wasn't able to do that, and things get difficult. Then let's start talking about how do we get back to helping families get on their feet again versus talking about what they didn't do well in that time when they weren't in a good place.
Well, thank you for sharing your perspective, Deb. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you would like listeners to know today?
I just think I'd love to share how proud I am to live in this community and be a part of it, and recognize that Larimer County has really made a lot of progress in the years that I've been here, and watching it continue to move in this direction makes me really proud to be a part of this community. I really appreciate everyone's efforts and support.
Thank you so much, Deb.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Again, that was Deb DeLuca-Forzley with the Larimer County Child Protection Services, talking about what we can do to prevent child abuse and neglect in our community. Learn more about Realities for Children and the Realities Rooftop Raise at realitysforchildren.com.